But yeah, the New Mexico Farmers Marketing Association works across the value chain across the state. So we're really pleased, really, really, really pleased that you're all able to join us and that we're going to do this all together, because that is what it's going to take. So thank you.
And I think it's over to you, Denise, now.
Okay, back to the unmute. So one of the first things I'm going to have to learn how to do is share my screen better. I seem to have a real technical blind spot. So Elena is going to help me. And I knew there was a reason I only have like 5 slides. They're not really, it's just that I like pictures more than the slides having a ton of information on them. But I'm going to talk to you today about why this is a collective impact project and a little bit about the history of the project. So it is a USDA grant, and this was the first year for this grant. And I think the name of the grant, even though we make it an acronym, RFSP, it really does summarize what this is about: a regional food system partnership. And this is going to be all about partnership. And it was $1 million 3-year grant. It will run through September 2023. And the $1 million is from the feds, and that doesn't even include about $240,000 or so that was match. So there's a lot of resources in this project. And actually, just before we even met today, I just kind of was curious what percentage of that budget is for not just contractors, but for all of the partners. And it's about 74% or so of the budget is for all of the support partners and hubs and contractors. So yeah, the budget is something we'll be talking about later. But anyway, next slide, please. Woo. So collective impact, why is this a collective impact and project? And the real basics, and some of these are probably going to look familiar. They came from a couple of things came from Juan, who has been counseling us on how to the how-tos of getting collective impact going. But from the moment that I really thought about the goals of this project, it seemed pretty obvious to me that because of the breadth of experience of our partners, which are really first and foremost grounded in the values that we all share, and the experience that we have working together over most of us many years, and all in different capacities. But I think these gears really do kind of illustrate the way that all of our organizations work together and need to work together when it comes to systems change. So I guess when I thought about the specific goals of the project, which we'll talk about in a minute, as well as the broader desire for systems change and to improve, the agricultural production in the state, it seemed like collective impact was the way to go, because it is really based on our values, and as a way to take our work out of the silos. Often we end up working in silos, and so to really try to bring us together, in more strategic fashion, more of us more consistently in this strategic way. So that was kind of the foundational thoughts. Next slide, please. And the goals of the project, I'm gonna have to make this a little bigger. I mean, I don't really want to read to you, but the underlying, and you've probably all read part of the grant narrative, but we are all working towards improving the economic viability of our agriculture producers, and we're going to create some new tools and shared resources that we can use to accomplish that. And by sharing our knowledge and we don't have to duplicate efforts. That's really important because, again, the work that happens in silos, unintentionally, we end up having duplication of efforts. And so hopefully this project will help reduce that kind of duplicative effort and that kind of administrative burden. And it'll help us really increase our public and private partnerships. So, our objectives are, there's more specifics in the grant narrative, obviously, but sales are always, an important thing for producers, right? And our hubs. So we want to increase the sales. We want to increase customer demand, which means, creating healthier communities and also improving the stability of the food hubs, which across the state, they're all in different stages of their evolution. And I think this project is going to allow for a lot of learning across, peer-to-peer learning. In terms of this is a 3-year grant technically from USDA, but even in our preliminary planning meetings leading up to this, we tend to very often talk about the longer term vision for the project, because systems change doesn't happen quickly, as we all know. And so we really see this going out beyond the 3-year grant project, and likely will be, we hope that we will be able to continue it for longer term, whether it means finding new funding along the way or however we all continue the work. But the vision really is probably going to go well beyond the 3 years. And I think that'll be something that we'll all be recognizing as we work on different different projects. And those of you involved in this work know that from your efforts. Nothing, particularly in agriculture, happens very quickly. Next slide, please. So, so this is, and I know, I think I saw, even in the one instant I saw Juan's slide, he's going to talk more about these practices, but really all of these focus areas that are collective impact really describe the way that we're going to work together and why it was such a good fit. And I think it's important to acknowledge that we're not really saying that I don't think we're taking any of these things for granted. To say that we all have an identical shared vision right now, that's probably not true. We're going to work towards creating a really cohesive shared vision. And we know that there will be mutually reinforcing activities. That's really the whole, what this grant will be structured around. And we will provide support systems for each other, and we will create shared measurement tools and metrics for the project. But all of these things will be in development. Nothing is, this is the framework, but it will be developing with all of you. So I know Juan will talk more about this, but again, it really sits on top of that very basic, we've got the values that we share, our experience, and our working together, and then we'll be doing it through this lens. Next slide. And so the project partners are also really important to why this is a collective impact project. As you can see, there's 11 transactional partners, as we call them, the food hubs and or CSAs. And then we've got our support partners, which are all of us, plus a few people who are missing today, and the consultants who are going to be really instrumental in guiding our work. And so it's going to be this combination of all of you who, you know, the support partners, basically, we don't have cash registers that ring up sales, but we're all, our work generally in the world functions to support, provide resources to help guide the value chain process in general. And so this will be, you know, more, it will be putting that focus on our work to help the transactional partners, who in turn help the producers, the farmers. And the next slide, please. Almost done here. So the real important thing here, and again, Juan will talk more about how our value chain network is going to work, but collective impact means that we're going to have a lot of teams. You already know that you are part of the support team, and we have a backbone team, which is Juan and Christina and Elena and Alana and I, who do sort of that background, you know, the backbone stuff. And then there'll be a leadership team, and then there's the full value chain partner group, and then there will be working groups. And the reason for that is because, from what I am learning about collective impact, is that it's really about the decision-making process and how it will be a dynamic, it's a dynamic governance structure, basically. And so you have to, you know, you have these concentric circles of where decisions are made and how they get approved, basically. So that's something I'm still, I mean, we're learning about this. We're kind of really all learning this together with Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan over there is our gentle guide. So that's kind of the structure of the value chain. And I think there's just one more, which is really a repeat of the, you know, the framework and why collective impact makes so much sense for this project, because it really is just bringing together the way I think most of us are working in this world anyway, but it will add the structure and the vision and the decision making and the tools to do it in a new and improved way, with that long-term, you know, with a real eye on measurement and on goals and output. So it is a strategic, it's a little bit, you know, the process might be a little slow, but it's got an eye towards that kind of work. And that really summarizes why it's a collective impact project.
Thanks, Denise. All right, so next we are going to have Juan just share a little bit more about collective impact as a process, as a structure. And I just want to acknowledge that we all work together, right, pretty regularly. And you should notice we're showing up with more formality than we normally would. And that's part of this collective impact process, is establishing protocols and really practicing what it looks like to do what Juan's gonna push us towards and share with us now.
Thank you, Elena and Denise. So most of you have probably heard the term collective impact. If you haven't, it's just a new term. As in the social sciences, we like to keep changing terms every 20, 30 years or so, just to keep people confused. And so systemic change was another term that had been used previous to collective impact. Systems change is another term. But basically, the whole idea behind collective impact is it's a collaborative approach for making sector level change. And what I do want to emphasize here about the word change is that this is not tweaking a system, but this is actually transforming a system. And so when we talk about sector level change, we're talking about either coming up with new approaches, and developing new systems, as opposed to just kind of reconfiguring what has existed. So it really is kind of addressing the whole situation from top to bottom. And when we look at the food supply chain, it is an incredibly complex system. And it's incredibly complex because you have so many variables and inputs into the system. And so it's everything from the weather to consumer preferences of what they want to eat. So it's everything. And so there's a lot of moving parts within the sector. And what you have there on this slide is just all of these different inputs, if you will, on what happens. And information and monies and everything is going in multiple directions. And like I said, it's incredibly complex. What's kind of nice in a sense, despite the fact that we just had a pandemic, is that in times of disruption, like we are now, is actually one of the best times for collective impact change. Because when things are going well and the system is running fine, there's not a lot of impetus or urgency for change. But when something like the pandemic hit, it obviously highlighted and showcased a lot of deficiencies in a lot of different systems, not just the healthcare system, but also our food delivery system was very disrupted by what just happened. And it's impacted by transportation. I mean, we just had this little crisis over the Suez Canal of shipping containers being blocked. And it turns out that 17% of our supply chain internationally was impacted by that. So any little single event can have a disruptive impact on the system. And so the whole idea behind transformative change is to make the system more resilient so that it can withstand those kinds of shortcomings that are highlighted. And so I think the good thing is that people are more poised now to look, are willing to accept new options, new changes to deal with the situation. This is the slide that Denise showed earlier. And so there's multiple areas regarding successful collective impact initiatives that need to be addressed. And so in our project going forward, we're going to be going through each one of these steps. They do not run in a sequence, but many of them are run concurrently. So that's why the idea behind all of this is more of an approach showing interconnected circles, because it's not a very linear process and it's not a top-down process at all. So a lot of us are used to organizational charts, which kind of have this box at the top and then things filter down. This is actually the opposite. Things filter up from the bottom in a collective impact initiative. So starting with shared vision, as Denise mentioned, we have to get into the discussion with our partners about what are the conditions that we want to change that impact our families and our communities. And so those are issues that each community addresses in their own way. And also, how do we combine all of our expertise, all of our strengths, and build successful strategies? And so the important part here is it is a shared vision that brings you to coming together to solve the problem. Now, a shared vision doesn't mean you agree lockstep in everything, but it does mean that you have certain outcomes or goals that you're trying to aim for. And so that's what you focus on. And you do that by doing mutually reinforcing activities. So as was mentioned earlier, you share your values and you get alignment on some values. And then from that, you understand the strengths and challenges that are presented and you learn from each other. The nice thing about this approach is it really is a team approach. And I don't have to sell any of you on the fact that when you have a team approach, the outcomes are generally better than if you're doing it in a siloed approach. You just have to have that kind of shared experience. And then you start working together to address your common interests. Over the course of this project, we'll be formalizing more partnerships and initiating joint projects. And so a lot of it is just this whole process of working together. That presents a lot of challenges. Some organizations have more capacity and ability to collaborate. Others don't necessarily have the bandwidth, but may have the desire. And others may be territorial. Hey, this is my turf, this is the area I've always worked in, and they may be resentful to others intruding on their perceived territory. So there's a lot of challenges in doing this, but there are processes for addressing that. And those processes involve the support system that is put into place. And so those of us that are on this call today, we are this support system. And again, unlike a typical project that's run top down, although we are going to be doing a lot of the lifting, we're not the decision makers in this process. And so we help support strategic planning and facilitation of activities. We have to position ourselves to be able to provide the technical support to the partners. Again, a lot of them don't necessarily have the capacity to do a lot of evaluation or the capacity to do a lot of data collection or data analysis. And so, those are the areas that we have to support them in terms of evaluation and technical support. When we have a shared measurement system on a multi-year project, of which this is one, that is really important for a number of reasons. We have to establish a baseline, if you will, to understand where we currently are and where we currently reside in terms of our data, and then look at how we then collect additional data that will help inform our work, so that as we tweak things, does option A work better than option B? And no, it doesn't. So, okay, let's stick with option A, or whatever. So we always are using data to inform our decisions. So in many cases, our evaluation is more developmental or formative in substance. In other words, we use the data to help inform our decision making. And then we use that data to see which of our approaches work best. All of that is handled through a lot of communication. And so that's the other challenge on a project like this. When you have multiple partners, and as you saw, there's a long list of transactional partners, support partners, and others who are going to be involved in this project, then communication becomes very important, and it has to be an ongoing process. And it happens actually at a couple of different levels. One level is the internal, if you will, communication among the organizations or the partners. And in that particular case, the organization there is usually focused on sharing lessons of what people find works for them, and having discussions on that, and how those can be replicated and expanded to other areas. So there's a lot of communication involved around a community of learning. The other is communication externally, and that's with others that we're trying to impact. And so, for instance, consumers, building awareness of the food chain and the food supply chain and options available for communities. That having that public dialogue is very, very important. And that generally also involves some advocacy. In other words, getting these systems to respond sometimes requires intervention by other external agencies. It could be government, could be foundations, it could be the public, but it's going to involve engaging others in this process. And the other thing I want to mention, and this is very, very important, is that even though the grant is for 3 years, when we're talking about a process like this, there has to be a commitment to a long-term process. And usually this is indicated by a decade or so. Collective impact projects, a lot of them are newer to the US, but there are other countries, Australia and Canada, for instance, that have been doing this for a couple of decades. And they've addressed some serious issues regarding Indigenous people in Canada, or environmental processes in Australia, et cetera. And they're seeing now the benefits of that long-term investment because they're turning things around. So the idea here in this long-term process is we all know it's going to take some time to get to where we want to get to. And so there's different phases. And again, this is not a linear process, even though on the screen in front of you, it looks very linear. But there's a lot of bleed between each of these buckets here. And so I would say right now, this particular group, we're somewhere between phase 1 and phase 2 here in terms of we're organizing for the impact, we're establishing kind of the framework for it. We've the key issues are somewhat already on the table. We're getting ready, and we're establishing some guiding principles and support. As we engage with others, then we will get more fully into phase 2 and move into phase 3. And one thing that you see there in phase 3 is this continuous process improvement process. And that is, we will constantly be tweaking so that the objectives we established today in 2021 may not necessarily be the objectives we end up with in 2023. They may morph and they may be more detailed. They may even be brand new objectives that we hadn't considered before. And all of that's going to be informed by our work. So I guess the most important thing to remember is that we all have to be agile, and there's going to be a lot of change, and we may not even know what the change is ahead of us until we roll up our sleeves and get into it. So that, in a kind of a nutshell, is the process. The one thing I do want to emphasize again is that our role as a support team is to provide guidance. And it's not necessary to lead people to, they have to do X, Y, and Z, but it's to find out how together we can do X, Y, and Z. So that this idea that we're in this together and we are serving as a support rather than an administrative executive team is very important. So any questions on this process or on any of the steps? Great, I'll turn it back to you, Elena.
Thanks, Juan. We're all moving around. Okay. First of all, I'm just curious, how many folks have been involved in a collective impact project or process before? I can say halfway. Okay, just curious. I was just curious, like as a baseline. I'm gonna go ahead and just give us a quick 2-minute break because I wanna practice giving breaks on Zoom because I think we're all at that place where it just feels like, hey, maybe stand up and grab a glass of water and come right back. So 2 minutes, come on back or stay here and chat as people instead of professionals. But I'm gonna go off for a moment. So I'll see you in 2 minutes. I'm back. I'm gonna grab a glass of water, but I'll be right back, Denise. Hey folks, as you come back, just put your screens back on or throw a thumbs up so we know you're here, okay? Denise, no problem. Thank you for joining. Why don't we create just a moment for you to introduce yourself? Denise King, do you mind?
Not at all. Hello, everyone. Denise King, Aging and Long-Term Services Department, Aging Network Director, and excited that that we're all able to meet and move on from this. I think it's very important. I've worked with many of you in other capacities with, I think, all of the same mission. And so nice to see many of the familiar faces. So thanks, Denise. Or I'm sorry, Elena, that was you, huh?
No worries. Thank you. Great. So as I shared earlier, my primary role is going to be supporting project management for this. And I think Juan just gave us a good frame of how this isn't your average project. But we wanted to kind of ground you again in some of the tools that we've been preparing as a backbone team. So we have been busy working on readiness tools and foundational instruments that we'll use to collaborate so that you guys can just show up, be present, contribute, collaborate. So first, I wanted to just take us through a logic model that we created to look, again, a little deeper at those grant objectives. And so I'm going to go ahead and change over to screen share real quick. There we go. Alrighty. Can folks see it okay? Do you want me to make it? I can make this full screen real quick. There we go. All right. So, and I want to just acknowledge that this is not my strong suit. So our team here, we all have been battling with the logic model, and the version that we have landed on today, what the goals of it are really, one, this is a working document. So this logic model looks really neat and fancy right now and concise in their little boxes, but it's a working document. It's a jumping off point, as Juan mentioned. And so our goal in identifying the steps towards the strategic actions or grant objectives is to reframe out of just, again, that USDA grant 3-year timeline and allow ourselves the space to see that these are longer term initiatives, how they might evolve, some of the steps we're going to go through. So I'm not going to spend like 20 minutes just preaching at you about all of these, but I thought we could go through and discuss from each line. So starting at the blue one, the strategic action, which is really around cultivating a resilient local food chain coordination ecosystem. So that's big, right? That doesn't sound like the grant objective per se. So we want to acknowledge that. However, if you look over here at the near-term outcomes, that does mirror our grant language. So again, the frame is that near term is within that sort of 3-year scope, but the long-term outcomes, that's what Juan was referencing, is really being transformational. This is, right, New Mexico becomes a model for value chain coordination around the state. We're doing it well, we're doing it with equity, we're centering farmers and producers and consumers that need it most. And so I hope that this doesn't give you a sense of panic, but rather a sense of sort of like peace in seeing that this grant is a part of a large vision, and that our work as a backbone team is to keep putting forth that large vision so we don't get caught in the micro details while ensuring we meet our grant deliverables and objectives that we've committed to. So real quickly, we'll start with the steps around cultivating a supportive and resilient local food value chain coordination ecosystem. So Juan sort of mentioned, the first step to this process in general is going to be establishing baselines so that we know how to improve, onboarding partners, which right now is our primary focus. You guys are the first team to be onboarded, and then you all receive that invite for the April retreat. That's the process that we're taking forward. We know that there'll be some trainings. Not all of us come with the same capacity to engage around this objective, and so we're going to need to define training needs. Asset mapping. So in April, we hope to tackle some more asset mapping with all of you and really start to evaluate where we can make change, where we might have gaps in power or influence, bring in new partners, go through that process again together. We're not going to come and show you, here's the map of the solution, but we will try to create all the tools for you to be able to show up and be a part of that thinking with us as a support team. Metrics and evaluation is a huge one. And again, that's where we have a great team. We've got Melissa from UNM and Christina, and I know a lot of you have been engaged in evaluation work in your own organizations. And so that is definitely a huge focus throughout each one of these strategic actions, but I would say particularly around resilience and supportive, defining what that looks like. One, what does it look like? And then two, how would we measure it? How would we measure that change? And then the third is identifying those gaps once we have, or the last one is identifying gaps once we have a definition for what that vision is of resilience. So this table kind of looks at then responsibility, resources, inputs. So we know that we've got our admin team, which is our backbone team, as Juan described, you guys as a support team. We're going to have working groups, which I'll dig into the structure a little bit more in a moment. And then we know that we have all of this existing expertise within our network. We have experts that are coming in from the outside that are helping to contribute. And that as a result, we're going to have ways of sharing our data and using technology to keep people included in this process. outputs that were really named. And again, this is a hybrid tool that shows things that were named in the grant, but also things that are inherent in this collective impact process when we're looking at the strategic actions. So there might be some new things that weren't in the grant, but all those grant things are represented as well as we work through. So we know that we're going to come out of, when we're working on defining these metrics, we're going to have some baseline data in order to do that. Our goal is to create work teams for each of our working groups, which we will talk about in a moment, but we'll have work plans. This isn't just going to be like working groups get together and chat, but rather that they have work plans that are anchored in these 3 strategic actions, and our job is to help create those. And then we plan on using Slack as a communications platform for this project, because we feel like it adds access for a lot of folks. It's a mobile friendly platform. It's also a new skill. And so I think there's something to that when we're all learning a new skill, practicing a new platform, it builds relationships and hopefully gives us a way to connect beyond our inboxes. And then also we'll be looking at defining those shared value statements as Juan really kind of dove into, which is, we know we have common goals and interests here, but how do we then tie that and anchor that to shared values that we can commit to and hold each other accountable to? And the spaces we create, that's why we're creating these spaces in this particular format. And then protocols, process protocols, which you might have gathered, we're already working on those. We're trying to practice them. We're trying to be transparent with them. The transparency of process and developing those protocols is how we're going to make the impact. So we don't want to leave that out as a result of our work in these around this action. Anyone else from the background team just want to add anything to my summary of our first strategic action and where we hope to go with it? Okay, the grant, again, names that where we're shooting is by 2023, 75% of our partners and 90% of the transactional partners. So those folks, as Denise put it, that have registers, dealing with consumers on the day-to-day, and then 90% of all of you, our support partners, have increased your capacity to develop some tools, to have resources, knowledge, to be a part of this project as actors, not just beneficiaries or one partner in the chain, but as empowered actors. All right, I'm going to pause. Any questions around strategic action number 1? That big blue column up there. All right, I'm gonna keep going, and I'm sorry, there's some drilling happening next door to me. I am undergoing home renovations. So I've got some contractors here today. So our second strategic action is really about generating new and expanding existing local food value chains. So again, we know that we're gonna need to establish a baseline. What are the value chains out there? How are they functioning? In that process, we're going to need to build some relationships when we're trying to reach into new communities or new sectors. So I know in a lot of our conversations around institution, we've talked about things beyond fruits and vegetables, right? Like there's these whole other value chains that are part of this constellation that we'll be pulling in as we work. As I mentioned, that'll help us identify those gaps in representation so that we can build relationships. There will be market opportunities, hopefully, that we identify in that engagement, new or opportunities to expand on something that's already working. And then something that I can really connect to, and I'm really grateful is in here, is how do we create processes and resources that are decolonized or not following the sort of conventional approach to doing value chain alignment. So as I think Juan and Denise started us off, right? This is not hierarchical. This is a sociocracy. This is all horizontal leadership, centering those impacted, and it's gonna look different. And I think for all of us, I feel grateful that we all have this relationship so that we can practice together. And decolonizing is, as you all know, not a linear process, but something we want to name as a specific step so it doesn't get overlooked. So then we have all the responsibility, resources, and inputs. I'm not going to go through it too much except to say we do anticipate an opportunity to not only bring in new partners, but to identify opportunities for new funding, whether it's actually someone saying, hey, apply for this, or a group says, you know what, this is missing from the project. We need to find funding so we can bring it in. So it'll be growing as we look at what that generation of new ideas looks like. And then the outputs that we're aiming towards there are really focused on the increasing, not only the quantity, but the quality of our relationships. and the transactions that are occurring between producers and buyers. So again, that quality, not just quantity. And then that we have processes that we feel are more inclusive and that people are able to come and engage equally in, that we see improved and expanded access so that the change is happening at the community level or within the sectors that we're trying to impact. And as I said earlier, identifying maybe new resources or opportunities to grow. And then this one is really anchored, I'm so sorry, it's very loud. This one is very anchored in expanding the market opportunity. So we want to see a grow in demand from consumers and therefore opportunity for producers. By 2023, the target number there is 52% as we sit today. But again, this is a living document. We're going to be looking at this and finding new opportunities, which might grow that, shrink that, depending on the values we anchor this all in. And then that capacity expansion, which, what does that mean, right? That can look like so many things. And so that's part of our work in defining when we get our baselines, what are the capacities that need to expand? You guys, anecdotally, you might have received a survey just yesterday about this that is asking you to share some of your current capacities so that we can start to define and work through this logic model a little bit. So the long-term outcomes of what we're really hoping from this objective is that communities increase the belief in their own power to create change. So we're not going to go out there and just fix the problems, but we're going to empower partners and community members and give them the capacity that they need to be able to create and actualize that change at the regional level. And we want to see broad geographic implementation. I think so often and historically, a lot of these efforts have focused in certain regions. We realize that, we know that's an express goal, is to see that grow. And then issues of equity of how partners can show up, who's at the table, who has voice, who has power, how are advocacy decisions made, all of that. We anticipate that those are things that we can work towards under this strategic action. Any questions about generating new and expanding existing value chains? No? Okay. And then our last one here is about generating cohesive, oh my goodness, I'm sorry, cohesive marketing promotion tools for local food, including some of the programs that have been supported by partners here, and developing new or expanding access points for local food purchasing, especially for communities that are low income or have lower access to fresh foods. So again, steps you're gonna notice everywhere: baselines, relationships, systems, protocols. So we know we need to first sort of see where we're at in that, do an audit. We're going to do an asset mapping, kind of an audit to identify all of those resources on the table, and then start to identify some of the gaps in access that might be within the reach of our network partners or also outside of the reach, which will then give us the direction that we know we need to spend more energy on generating new value chains in those areas. So going back up to objective 2. And then again, we have these same sort of resources and inputs. However, we do want to acknowledge that there's many of our partners have extensive marketing resources, skills, experience, expertise to bring. And so we certainly are going to be relying on our transactional partners around this quite a bit too. Many of the outputs, again, they mirror what's above, but I think most specifically, this is that outreach piece and giving everybody the opportunity to connect, and then also to have tools to be able to make that change at the community level. We want to see more expanded local food offerings, as we said, and I would even sort of say local, fresh, however it gets defined in that community, culturally responsive, whatever it looks like. And then again, we're just aware that as our mission grows and we bring in new people, we're always going to have this kind of cycle of new resources, whether that be funding or other types. So the expressed goal in our grant, so our near-term outcome is a $200,000 increase of double up food bucks used. That is the metric that's currently attached to this. So that's something we'll talk about as well. And then the long-term outcome, again, this is like that big vision. It's increasing food security in vulnerable communities. Like, that's huge, and we want to see that. And these are some of the steps that we think we can use as a team and that will engage you around to get there. So I'm going to pause and just take a time for reactions. Does this feel to those of you that are familiar with this project and those of you that aren't, does this feel like it's really anchored in what you thought you would be showing up to in terms of objectives and this logic model as we're now presenting the project to you in a slightly larger frame than you might have anticipated?
I've got one question. This is Pam. I've got one question around in the green.
Oops, sorry. There you go.
Under near-term outcomes, what was the baseline for, it says expand market yield to 1.8 million, 52% total increase. What was the baseline for that?
So Pam, I better try to remember.
Sorry, and you don't have to worry about it now.
Well, you know, I'm guessing that I might have, and I don't really remember the specifics. I was probably looking, I mean, the most stable data that we have is kind of a combination of the market data that we collect from our from all the farmers markets and sort of what we know to be selling into the grocery stores. And I may not have even included farm to institution in there, but you know, it was kind of I'd have to look back at my, yeah, it was just sort of the best guess from what we know from those types of sources.
That must not include the farm to institution numbers. So that sets our baseline way lower than it actually is, which will.
Yeah, I didn't think I included, right? Yeah.
Which is why I asked the question, just because that'll be a good, like Kendall just said, you know, which is yeah, we can put out those baselines that we already know, and then what are the ones we really want to, you know, figure out, and then utilizing similar tools to get there, right? So, yeah, great, thank you, thanks.
Yeah, it's a
Melissa,
good
I
question.
see your hand up. Sorry. Okay, I just wanted to acknowledge, Melissa, your hand's raised. So your turn.
Okay, I didn't quite catch it. So I know nothing about any of this. I'm like the total dum-dum in this group. So I have a really basic question to ask you, which is that when you say the goal is improve long-term economic viability of New Mexico agricultural producers, you're clearly, well, who are you talking about? I don't think you're talking about dairy farmers. I'm not sure. So that's my first question. I have another question too.
Yeah, you're right, Melissa. You know, producers, it's often used. I sometimes use it more broadly. We are really focused on, I think when most of the work of the NMFMA truly centers around specialty crop growers. So our fruit and vegetable farmers. We occasionally do include the work of ranchers and other food producers in things that we're talking about, because, you know, at farmers markets, there's all these other food sales. So that is probably, it's really good that you're calling out that for a definition, and it really would be more accurate to say fruit and vegetable farmers is probably a more accurate. We don't really, yeah, we try to support the other food producers as we can, but our work focuses on fruit and vegetable producers.
Okay, thank you. And then also, does it matter the size? Like, do you deal with like corporations if there was one, or is this, I mean, is part of like your target group like small farms? I'm just, you know, again, as an outsider, just like I don't know.
Those are all really great. And that's why one of the things that we've got there in the steps are coming up with definitions, like definitions, and the language that we use around all of this is going to be very important to really define, you know, we can't measure what we haven't accurately defined. So they're very good questions. And again, the NMFMA does focus our work, as do most of our partners here, I believe, focus on the small to mid-sized growers. It does not mean that we exclude larger farmers. We will serve, you know, we do work with larger farmers, but they tend not to be commodity farmers. So it's a very valid question. And I think all of the that will be something that when the full partners are together, I think it will be good to get a sense. I'm giving you the NMFMA answer, but this is a collective process. So we will have to pull together that answer from everybody.
Okay, thank you. And then, so just about this, these three different areas, I'm wondering, again, as someone from the outside trying to like understand what you're doing, could you say that like I just wrote some notes, like is the first one about your partners and the green is about the market and the yellow is equity? Because I think that like, I don't know, it's a lot of words and it's just hard for an outsider to quite grasp what they're about. So that's all I have to ask.
I could take a stab at addressing that, and then anyone, Backbone team members. I would say that the blue is really focused on the transactional partners, so the food hubs. The green is really focused on consumer demand, so we're looking a little bit as more consumer driven, and then the orange on the bottom or yellow is the network. And wait, no, I'm sorry, I got that. Wait, no, I see Alana's head, and now I'm trying to get back to it. Communities increase. No, the bottom one, sorry, the bottom one is the consumer. And then the top one is, yes, the capacity of our actual network to function. And then the green is our food hubs and transactional partners. Is that correct?
It's yes.
Alana?
And in addition, I'll just add this and then Alana can expand, but in addition to the sales of our transactional partners for the green, it's also just the sales of all the farmers across the state. So some of it might be through our transactional partners, and some of the market opportunities that we create, it might not be going through our transactional partners. That could be direct sales, et cetera. Yeah, Alana, do you have any other thoughts to add there?
Okay, thanks. I agree. I feel like it's a little complicated, but I did want to underscore what Denise said, which is all of this, right? Like the questions, Melissa, that you were bringing up, we do have, those are the critical questions we'll bring up in April with the full network, because we can't answer on behalf of them yet in terms of starting to make those definitions. So it's one of those moments where we have to pause for the process. And I'm just going to name that for me, that it feels a little counterintuitive at times.
Okay, so
All right.
I guess my only suggestion on the strategic action is if it's about the network, if it was like network : it would just help an outsider understand what we're talking about. That's all. But I really appreciate this. It's really detailed compared to my first interaction with you guys. Now I'm starting to like get an idea of what's going on. So thank you.
And this was,
And I think Melissa, I was gonna say, I think Melissa highlights an issue that is common when you have a large project like this, and that is just trying to grasp the scope and who all the partners are and what we're trying to address. And part of that's going to be right now, I would just say this, that the idea behind the logic model is not necessarily to share it widely with the average consumer, for instance, who buys their vegetables at a farmer's market, but rather this is more of a guide for the support team, so that we as a support team kind of get a sense of what it is we're trying to accomplish, who's involved in that process, and what are some basic steps. So it is kind of in a sense, like a planning guide. And as such, it will evolve, as Elena mentioned, as we convene the retreat and work with our transactional partners. There will be a process where we have to go through definitions of what is a producer, who's part of the value chain, those types of things. But it is, I think, helpful as a planning guide, so that when somebody comes onto the project, they get a sense of what is happening and who all is involved. It is difficult for somebody not in the ag industry or in and familiar with these terms to grasp all of it. I agree with that.
Denise, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I think Juan covered it. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so that's what we're trying to do. Now I'm going to take just a moment to talk to you guys about how we anticipate that functioning. So what's the structure we're adopting in which to tackle those goals? And I know you saw this with Denise, but I'm going to bring it back up and really focus again on the function of these groups though. So the backbone team, as we've been referencing, we're that day-to-day project activities, facilitating new relationship building, keeping records, both fiscal, communications, managing platforms. So that's all of us that invited you here, NMFMA and a couple of us contractors. And so we will be continuing to play that role alongside some technical support partners where they connect into specific pieces of the project. So for those of you that are familiar, Falling Colors, Fresh Systems, they have like very definite time-bound specific roles. So they're not engaged in the larger project in the same way. The support team, that's all of you. The goal for you guys and what your function is in the whole is really facilitating the implementation of some of these strategies that go forward by contributing resources, contributing capacities that you might have or hold or control, and being able to, again, actualize the vision that comes out of the working group that is led and rooted in our transactional partners and producers. So again, those most impacted are really going to be leading our decisions. And to do that, we'll have a leadership team, which we've all sort of alluded to. But here you can see that there's a constellation, and again, not set in stone. We might decide we need one more representative in one of these, depending on how we move. But the leadership team will be responsible for decision-making processes for the whole project. And again, this is from more of a sociocracy model. And so it's going to look like consensus-based decision-making through decision-making circles. Juan, I'm practicing my language. So correct me if I use it wrong. But essentially that within your support team, you guys will make decisions as a group and come to some common understandings. You'll have representatives in the leadership team, so you'll be able to carry that forward into the whole of the strategy, but you'll have autonomous decision-making for as a team, how you guys choose to show up and what initiatives that you sort of ascribe to. In addition, you'll also have an opportunity to work in those working groups alongside transactional partners. And that's, again, where the value of you being support partners that are more systems level at this point in time is so critical to bridging between those working groups and de-siloing. And then the VCCN is what we're calling the full network. So that is the working groups and primarily the transactional partners and food hubs. So there'll be 4 representatives in the leadership team from that group, because again, that is where we really want to anchor the decision-making power. But it's really important that each one of the structures is represented in how we make decisions for the whole. And that is the core of what we're trying to set up now. The VCCN partners, again, food hubs and transactional partners is how we've been referring to them. The list is here, I'm not going to go through them, but those partners will have an opportunity to engage in all of the working groups that you see far over to the right. So it's possible that some of our partners might be in more than one of these groups. It's possible that there might be one partner really leading in a particular area. I also want to acknowledge it's possible the working groups might change. And I know this probably feels to you guys like, well, then what do you know? But we do know, and there's a structure, but we feel like, for instance, under the working groups, depending on who comes to this, you might see ways to collapse those into each other differently as other people. So, in other words, farmer training resources, well, food safety is a farmer training resource, but there's more beyond that. And so we left them separate because they were all areas that we had goals attached to in the grant. But we do anticipate there might be some slightly restructuring of the working groups. So again, in a nutshell, as a backbone team and a support team, we are responsible for facilitating and implementing that vision that's really coming from our partners on the ground. We're going to be a part of these collective decision-making processes that will not be hierarchical, that will not be in a vacuum. It will be rounds of decisions. So you'll make decisions in the support team that will carry over to the leadership team. Juan, do you think I'm missing anything there that's essential to communicate at this point in time?
No, and again, part of this process of defining the working groups will come out of the April session. There's the survey that was just initially sent out. And hopefully from the results we get from that survey will help us better define not only the agenda for that event, but also what working groups we would establish, which seem to have the highest priority among the partners, that type of thing. So we really depend on a lot of input from all of the collaborators to really focus our direction.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think at one point recently, you basically said that, right? Like what we want to take away from this is a strong understanding that we are depending on collaboration. We're not holding, behind this. We don't have a secret plan. We really are depending on all of you coming in, helping us fix these tools, make it work in the way that we need to. Denise, your hand is up.
I'm not used to being so polite, but it's good practice. I was just going to say that one of the questions that always crosses my mind when I hear things like, well, and the support team is going to be helping facilitate working groups. And I think, wow, am I equipped to do that? Or there might be other questions that you have like that. We are planning, part of the grant is to provide professional development and training as we need it. So if the support team says, decides like, oh yeah, once we know more about what these working groups are going to be and what we will be facilitating, and if we say, well, we need help, or if you say, really, we need help learning how to facilitate those groups, we can have trainings to help you learn how to do whatever it is, whether it's facilitating groups or whatever it might be. But that is part of what the grant is also aiming to do, is to provide that training for all of us.
Thank you, Denise. Yeah, and that actually was going to be the next question that we posed to all of you. Thanks, Denise, for going there. And the one other thing I wanted to underscore, which I think I mentioned earlier, but the working groups will have a structure. So each one of those working groups will create a work plan, and they might relate to each other. Some things might be a little bit more isolated, but the planning goes through all these levels, and then the decision making is rooted in that. So again, everything we're doing is sort of evidence-based and rooted to the strategic actions that we just covered. But our big question for you and what we wanted to take away from this, now that you've heard a little bit more about what the project is, where we're headed, and what we hope how you guys can engage as support team members, we just want to pause and say, are you already nervous about anything? Are there any capacities that you feel like, hey, we need a little bit more of this right now? Anything that you're feeling that you want to share about being able to commit to the role as a support team member? And you can sit on that too, if you need time to marinate.
I guess I'm just reflecting on how ambitious this is. And I know it's totally necessary and relevant and like rooted in this moment, because we have so many isolated initiatives, and I'm speaking to the choir here, with the same people and the same outcomes and the same objectives, and we're not unifying those efforts. It's very exciting. I'm totally on board and excited. It just is, to see it on paper like this, it is pretty ambitious. So I just wanted to make that comment. I mean, I'm really looking forward to supporting you all in whatever way you need. And again, in year 3, I'm really excited to look backwards and sort of reflect on all the progress we've made on pulling the many threads into one beautiful blanket versus individual threads that are operating in isolation. So just want to say kudos and thank you. It's a lot, but I'm excited.
Thanks, Kendall. It is a lot. It's a big vision, right? I'm grateful that that's the vision we have forth. And there's many paths that we're going to get there. We have no doubt that there will be steps forward and steps back, and that we're all going to learn and grow through it. But thanks for naming it, just that it seems big. That in and of itself, yeah, that means maybe we need to do a little bit more work making it feel digestible. Anyone else? All All right, I'm going to invite you to throw it in the chat box. We will save the chat, and that's going to help us as we digest from this meeting. But I want to acknowledge the time and respect that. And real quickly, I have one last, just want to let you know where we're headed. Right now, we're engaging partner onboarding. Here you are, so you know that, through April, through the end of April with our April retreat. You're going to be receiving some tools along the way as we onboard partners. So you just received a link for a capacity survey from partners from Christina. Please do complete that. That's really going to help us as we form the agenda for April and start looking at some asset mapping. We're also going to be sending out letters of commitment, or for those of you that are more public facing partners, well, letters of commitment. And so in that, it's going to outline what it looks like to be a partner. And we're going to ask you to name a lead contact from your organization and a couple other things. We'll share with you again a short form of the narrative from the grant if you just need to sort of sit with that a little bit more, if that makes it feel more digestible. And then we're working on a communications plan. As I mentioned earlier, we do plan to be launching Slack as our project platform, and we're going to be readying to send you guys all those invites. And I just want to say we're going to do training on Slack. We acknowledge that it's a new tool for most people. So there will be a training process. And in the communications plan, we will outline use protocols, access protocols, everything that makes it so it's really transparent of why we're doing this and how you can engage with the tool. So that's all coming between now and the retreat. And then we want you to be ready to anticipate your engagement in the April retreat. So our ask of you at this point, we're still finalizing the agenda, but our ask of you at this point is just to consider how you want to share about your organizational role in value chain, coordination. So maybe it's not just introducing, maybe it's photos, something like that. We'll give you more framing for that, don't worry, but that's what we're going to ask of you. And then the second thing is we will have a session more targeted on evaluation, and as the support team, that's a key role of this group. So that will occur in April as well. All right, Christina, I'm going to hand it to you. I'm sorry about the time.
That's A-okay. Just as the last bit of work for today's meeting is to solidify when we will be meeting, whether it's bi-weekly or monthly, and it's important to have a regular meeting schedule solidified in everyone's mind, just so it makes it easier for everyone to commit to the group and the work that we'll be doing. So does Wednesday work for people? I think that came out of a doodle poll as a high level day that people could generally meet. And just to keep in mind that initially one suggestion is to meet bi-weekly. And if the group decides that that's too often, we can decide to cut it back to monthly. But especially as we start to ramp up and get used to the process and everything the project's about, bi-weekly seems like a good start. So what do people think about Wednesday? Does anyone have a problem with Wednesday, just as a general day, and then we can talk about time? Let's see. So there's a comment in chat. I'm going to see what that is about. Kendall has a question about the dates for the retreat. I'll answer that.
Yeah, I'm typing it in right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks, Denise.
Yeah, and there's a calendar hold coming to you right when we get off of this. I was supposed to do it before, but crazy.
Okay, so if Wednesday works, can everyone just raise their hand either on the screen or Melissa, does Wednesday not work for you?
I just have the first week of the month, I have a recurring commitment.
Okay. What time is that at?
Exactly this time.
Okay, so let's think about the time of day. Keeping Melissa in mind because she's key. She really needs to be at these meetings. Kendall, do you have your hand raised that Wednesday works, or do you have your hand raised because you have a question?
Sorry, I was raising as Wednesday works. Have a scheduling conflict 11:30 to 1:30, so it could be before that, or Or you also could look at Wednesdays this time on the weeks Melissa doesn't have her meeting.
Would
Since we won't be
morning,
meeting.
like from 9:30 to 11? Somewhere in there. Does anyone have a problem with mornings?
So the Kendall's commitment is my class. So that's hard for me because I often have to prepare ahead of time. So what I mean, usually this time is fine. It's just once a month I have those meetings. So like the next one,
Is it, which is it, the first Wednesday of the month?
yeah. So if
Okay,
for the next, it looks like it would be okay for like ever.
okay, great. All right. So that's not a problem. So for the time, which time would work for you, Melissa? Does it
This
not
time.
matter?
Because it doesn't fall on the first week, this time is good.
Okay. And Kendall, does this time work for you? Okay. Does this time work for everyone, or are there people who this time is just not good?
And you're
Okay.
asking, can I just ask, sorry, really quick? So that would mean Wednesday, April 14th, the next one would be the 28th. So that every other week?
Yeah, the 14th would be our next one, and then the following week, or the following, 2 weeks after that would be our retreat.
Right. And then it would be 2 weeks after.
Correct.
The 12th of May. Got it. Okay, good.
Okay. So every 2 weeks, and if we get to the point where we think it's just, we've covered everything and we're rolling along and we only need to cut it back, we can address that at that time. But I don't think we're at that time. So April 14th from 2:30 to 4 is our next support team meeting. And at that time, we will be talking more specifically about the data management plan for the project. It has been mostly written, but there are some holes as it relates to things like sharing of data, reporting of data, and things like that we need to discuss as a group. And Melissa and I will be meeting one-on-one before that to just get our ducks in a row. Yes. I sent you an email, Melissa, so yeah, that's okay. But she and I will be working more closely on the evaluation piece. Okay, is there anyone have any last minute questions before we sign off for this session? People can lower their hands if they don't have.
Yeah, Elena, this is Denise from ALTSD. I had emailed asking that Ophelia be also listed for both of us for these meetings as well as the retreat. I am committed and I will be joining hopefully regularly so that that both of us will be part of it. But there's times I don't have control over my schedule the way I'd like. So I'm going to be asking that she be added.
Great. And she is now officially on the roster. So we'll just make sure. And yeah, our ask of all of you is if you can't attend a meeting, if you have an alternate that you can tap someone else at your org or someone else in the work, that's the request. So thanks, Denise, for that.
And I'll miss part of the next one coming up, but I'll be there for the first part. I apologize. It's just a regular conflict. So, but the rest will work.
Thank you all. Again, thanks for joining us. Thanks for committing to this long journey with us. Melissa, your comment, like, I've got it, I think forever. I was like, well, that's what it's going to take by the sounds of it. So again, thanks for being good partners. We will follow up with some cleaned up meeting notes for all of you with some links to the slides or graphics that we shared in case you need to revisit them. And then we have a couple people missing. So I just want to acknowledge that, and we will follow up with them to make sure they've received the same information so we can all come together on the 14th with the same capacity to engage. So thank you all. It's good to see your faces and nice thing at the end of the day. I appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Everyone, thank you.
I have a question, Denise. Do you want me to copy and paste this whole chat out of here? Did we decide? There's a lot in here.
Is there a lot? I must have missed.
There's a few little, I mean, nothing that, probably Alana got it. Did you get it at the same time?
Let's see, support team partners.
I don't think it's too essential. We got the dates out. Okay, yeah, we're good. All right, I'm gonna close it.
Yeah, I know. I wasn't sure about the date. I know everyone will be getting the date in a minute. I mean, the times. I wasn't sure on the time of the last retreat date, but I'm sure you'll be sending
9
that
to
shortly.
noon. Yeah, I'll send it right now, so that they have the hold. I didn't get to that today.
Yeah,
And
and
then
just we don't. Elena, maybe we can catch up. Maybe Elena and Alana. Boy, those names are hard together. But I had some thoughts about the folders and like migrating. Maybe everything should migrate over to the new email address drive, the drive that's associated. So we can have a separate little powwow on that and some organization of files and stuff. Just feels like there's going to be a lot more, incoming stuff. So just getting that kind of tightened up.
Do we want to do a quick debrief on today's session?
Sure. I think we lost Christina, but what'd you think, Juan? You're the pro.
I think it went really smooth. I thought the handoffs were great. I thought everybody was pretty concise. We stayed right on schedule. I think we covered a lot. A couple of minor suggestions is on the logic model. There's in the middle, there's a column that has the headers. It's kind of in the middle, and maybe just deleting that column because it's up at the top. Yeah.
Yeah, the row. Yep.
Yeah, very minor. The other thing is maybe in the future, and this is the way dynamic governance would work, and just so that we can start modeling it more, is like Elena, when you're asking for feedback on something, usually the way would do it is you would do it in rounds. And so the first round is actually asking for a clarification feedback. In other words, does anybody here have any questions about any aspect of this? Just for clarification, not whether you agree or disagree or like it, don't like it, anything like that, but just clarification questions. And I would specifically start the practice of calling each person by name and then letting them know if they don't have any clarification questions, they just say pass. But the idea behind that is that we start practicing this going in rounds each time so that everybody gets the expectation that they're going to be asked for their response each and every time we go through these things.
great.
And then after the clarification round, when we clarify any questions they have, like, like Melissa's questions were clarification questions, like are these big farmers, small farmers, that kind of stuff. Those are perfect clarification questions. Then you could have if it's in the agenda and that's what we want to do, you could have a discussion round like, okay, now how do people feel about this? Is there something there that stands out that you don't like or do like or agree with, don't agree with, think that needs to be changed, that type of thing. So you had then a second discussion round, if again that we built that time into the agenda, because that can take some time.
Is there another round or just clarification and then discussion?
Well, if we're making a decision, then there would be a decision round, but
Fine.
we weren't making any decisions on anything today, so we wouldn't have to have that.
Great. Yes, we'll build that in because it sounds like we need to, and it will take time. We got just through it today, but yeah, that's super helpful.
Yeah, and it does. I've done it with groups, and at first they're kind of put off, but then they kind of get into the habit of doing it, and so that's what we want. We want people to get into the habit of listening to everyone and everybody's questions being answered, and knowing that everybody's going to be asked, so that we don't have the wallflowers, that are shy and don't want to say anything. They're going to be asked too. Everybody will be.
Great.
Elena, do you want
for the notes, they should just stay right in the agenda, and I took really super detailed notes just so that we have them, and I thought I could leave them as the notes down there, and then I'll like add any like highlighted bullet points that seem really important in the different sections in the agenda. Does that sound right to you? And action items at the top? Yeah.
Sounds good.
And are we sending them out? Or are we just like, the notes live here, so if you can go there if you need them?
This time I'll send them back out just because we didn't clarify that. So I'll send them out like a thank you, and I'll also include Steve and Jason. We're the only ones, I think. I did a quick roster check. I think it was Steve and Jason missing. So I'll include them in that, and then a follow up to them that's like, hey, here's all the stuff you missed if you need. So yeah, this time we will, but maybe moving forward, we can just let people know that the expectation is that the notes are there and they can revisit them as needed.
And so this is still recording.
Oh, sorry.